Doug Casey is a legend for living and investing overseas, and today I'm going to share with you some of his best tips. Today I'm going to share with you some of Doug Casey's best thoughts, direct from his own mouth, on how to live and invest overseas, including in up-and-coming markets that no one's talking about, his meetings with politicians, his thoughts on lowering your taxes, even why he prefers inefficient governments to more efficient ones. He's lived in Argentina and Uruguay. He's done deals in Africa and Asia. He's one of the great speculators of our time, and he's going to tell you how he did it in just a minute. If it's your first time here, my name's Andrew Henderson. I'm the founder of Nomad Capitalist. We're a boutique consulting firm for 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors who want to legally reduce your taxes overseas, protect your assets, get a dual citizenship to make sure you remain free. We're also the host of the best offshore conference in the world called Nomad Capitalist Live, where Doug Casey spoke last year. People were jumping up and down. They were hooting and hollering. He's coming back again this year, and I want to share with you his best thoughts on living and investing overseas over decades. When you look at internationalizing, what do you look for in terms of finding a place that's perhaps the opposite of an empire?
Well, it's slim pickings in today's world. I live most of the time in Argentina and Uruguay. And look, one of the nice things about so-called third world countries is that the governments are much less efficient and much less effectual than in the U.S. And all of these third world countries tend to be actually much more corrupt than the U.S. The U.S. is still, among the good things about it, is it's still a relatively high trust society. There's not a lot of corruption, really.
You could argue spending $1 billion to run for president seems a little corrupt.
You're right. You're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. But in the U.S., it's generally dangerous to bribe a cop if he pulls you over. It's done all the time, but it's generally dangerous to bribe. You got to be careful to bribe most government officials. But in the third world, it's not only not so dangerous, but it's kind of expected. So the U.S. is moving in that direction, though, obviously. But that's a double-edged sword, because when you have all these laws, if you don't have corruption, and if they enforce those stupid laws, of which there are millions, well, you can't do anything. So corruption actually becomes a good thing.
You're saying in the U.S. it's hard to do anything?
Yes, exactly. We got all these laws, but it's hard to get around them. And in Argentina, we got all those laws, but you can get around them.
So you like it much better in Argentina, much better in Uruguay?
Yeah, despite the fact that Argentina's got a perfectly horrible government. I mean, they're an exemplar of stupidity on every level. Uruguay is somewhat better. But these countries, anything can change with the next election.
You said, though, in Argentina, you felt that at one point the government treated you as just some wealthy gringo, and all right, let him do his thing. We got other fish to fry. Is that a correct summary?
Pretty much. If you're not a citizen, you're owned by another government. So it gives you a little bit of insulation. You're a foreigner, they can kick you out. My Spanish is good enough for taxi drivers and restaurant workers, but I can't carry on a philosophical conversation in Spanish, so I can't rock the boat. And they're happy to have me there because I bring money and employ the people. And so, it's despite the fact that Argentina is very, very problematical, for me, it's a very pleasant place to be.
This is one of the things that people seem to bring up. Well, you don't have certain freedom of speech in some places. They'll mention Singapore, and I kind of wonder why would you want, out of all the places you could move, why would you want to move there and start protesting? I mean, it seems like to me that's why you're leaving. It's just to kind of float above someplace.
Exactly. I don't get involved in politics anywhere. I will make philosophical ideas and concepts I have. I love to have those kind of conversations with anybody that'll listen, but I'm not trying to convert anybody. I'm not trying to convince anybody. So, I'm just, no matter where I can go, I can be a crazy, entertaining gringo from their point of view. Not threatening, because I'm not political.
What do you think about Uruguay?
Even though I'm an anarchist, I don't believe in the state.
What do you think about Uruguay, who came out and said, we're not going to raise taxes, or since you're there?
Well, let me say that Uruguay is very overrated in many ways.
Sure.
Tell you how stupid, well, I guess I can say this. I'll tell you how stupid the average Uruguayan is. It's a welfare state to start with. It's one of the very oldest welfare states in the world, which is a pretty unsound foundation. That's the bad news. The good news is there are only 3.5 million people, and it's basically a farming country. But
It's a lot easier to do that with better than 350 million people now.
That's right. That's right. And actually, I was talking about corruption a minute ago, but Uruguay is one of the 2 least corrupt countries in Latin America, no question about that. But I'll tell you how stupid, well, Uruguayans are no more stupid than people everywhere. But about 6 years ago, I think, they had a plebiscite that voted in an income tax. I'm not talking about an income tax was foisted on them by a legislature. It was voted in by plebiscite. They voted to have an income tax put in. That's bad. Look, there's all kinds of things. You live in because the legislature, nobody's life or property is safe when the legislature's in session. Like one of the major things in Uruguay is tourism. My estancia is close to Punta del Este, which is kind of it's one of those 3 or 4 jet set places in South America. And so what did they do a few years ago? They passed a 0.00 tolerance drunk driving law. So you dare not, in a beach resort in the summer, you dare not have a drink. And they have checkpoints that are set up during the temporada, during the season, to arbitrarily test you. And you better not get caught. So there's all kinds of nuisances with Uruguay I can go on to. But they leave me alone, generally speaking. They do leave me alone, and it's pleasant and peaceful. You don't have to worry about the Frito Bandito or rebels. Although they did have rebels during the 80s, and the military government at that time, nothing like Argentina, where the generals probably killed about 20,000 citizens. But in Uruguay, there were probably about 500 that were disappeared.
If you were to do it all over again, would Latin America be the continent of choice?
Well, I'm a big fan of Africa as a speculator, as a kind of an entrepreneur, as it were, a political entrepreneur. Everything's so politicized there. But where would I go? You know, because I've lived in, I don't know, 10, 11, 12 countries. I could count them up. And I visited 160, most numerous times. Basically been living outside of the U.S., living in the United States, out of the United States for the last 40 years. So would I go back to Latin America? Well, what are your alternatives? I mean, that's why, I kind of got into the hobby that I have that's related to this, which is visiting shithole countries and getting an appointment with the president or the military dictator. Or
How do you do that?
It's
For the viewers who want to get an appointment also.
Well, it's not easy if you're just a gulag off the street. But I'm fortunate in that over the years, because I've written a lot and I've spoken a lot, and wind up with, well, look, for instance, I've played polo, no longer do, but I played polo for 20 years. You say, okay, so what? I play golf, I play tennis. That's good. But polo is kind of a special sport, and in any country in the world where they play it, if I go to the polo club, I'm automatically one of the boys of because these are the rich guys in the
It's not exactly a low level.
Exactly. And so you meet somebody, you talk to them, and you go home to dinner, you meet friends, and it's pretty easy in these countries.
A lot easier than meeting the President of the United States or something like that.
Yeah.
The guy's just hanging around, right? So you're going
Exactly.
to these countries.
And there's always, like for instance, I'm very interested in art, painting and sculpture. So that's something that people in these countries that are connected do. And go there, one thing leads to another. I mean, it used to be, I don't do this anymore, really, that I'd wander into the capital city of some place, don't know anybody, don't know anything. So I would open up the Yellow Pages, which existed in those days, and do two things. I'd go to lawyers, because they know everybody, they're absolutely wired if you go to the right law firm. And I'd interview a bunch of lawyers. They're happy to talk to you. Who knows? I might be a rich guy that can give them business.
Just throw them a retainer, perhaps?
No, not necessarily.
Don't even hire them?
No, I'm interviewing them
Okay.
to hire them. And if we get along, then one thing leads to another. And look, in Dominica, for instance, this is kind of an interesting story. I went there, and let me see, when did I go there first? Jesus. During the 70s sometimes, okay? And I met with this one lawyer, and we got along very well, just chatting. We liked each other. And I was telling him about what I did and what I thought. And he said to me, Mr. Casey, you ought to meet my brother Kenny. He's the director of the Industrial Development Bank. Little country, 60,000 people, has an industrial development bank. It's kind of quaint. So he sets up a dinner for me with his brother that night. And there we are in the restaurant. And we're talking. And Kenny's kind of suspicious of me because it's a black country and I'm a white guy. I might be a Uhuru jumper. And so we're blah, blah, blah talking. And this is where I really hatched the plan that became the centerpiece of my hobby of talking to guys that ran countries. And I told them about my radical plan, which I'd never pitched to a government before, of how they could basically turn their nothing nowhere country into Hong Kong on steroids very quickly. And what it would do is enrich every common man in the country, because we take all of the government's possessions. They had lots of crown land and the state this, the post, all these things would be put into a corporation and run for profit. But the shares would be distributed 70% to every man, woman, and child in the country, so they all profit from it at that point. And I was thinking, well, 10% would be put in trust for the next generation, so that people born in the next 21 years would also have an interest in it. And 15%, let's say, would be distributed to people that make things happen. So I said to Kenny, I said, that 15%, well, that might go to people like yourself, for instance. And I said, when we take, with the last 5%, when we take it public in New York, London, and Tokyo, there'll be warrants attached and warrants given out to people that are making things happen. And let's suppose that the stock goes public at $10, but you might have 1 million warrants at a penny. And I'm hoping that since he's a director of the industrial, he can do the math. And he thought about it for a minute, and actually more, thought about it for 10 minutes. And he came back and he said, and this is one of those things that somebody said that's burned into your mind. He said, after thinking about it for 10 minutes, that's very interesting, Mr. Casey. Tell me more about those warrants. So I did, and I explained what we'd do. 10 minutes later, he went off and he called Eugenia Charles, who was the president of the country at that time. Remember, I was new in that country yesterday. He called Mrs. Charles, who became famous, incidentally, when the U.S. invaded Grenada. This is how we can tell when I was there. It was just before the invasion of Grenada. The head of the invasion force of Grenada was not Ronald Reagan. It was Eugenia Charles. She was the beard. She was the, for show. The U.S. always likes to seem multinational, so they got Dominica to act as when they invaded Grenada. So he went off and he called Mrs. Charles and set up an appointment for me with her the next morning. Now you're saying, well, okay, what happened then? Because part of my plan was to generate capital. There's more to the plan. I don't want to go into this whole thing, but was to sell economic citizenships. Nobody had done it before, to my knowledge. It was my idea, and I think Dominica was one of the first countries to do it. St. Kitts is the big one on the block now. So anyway, he set the appointment up, and then it turned out her father, who was very sick, died that evening. And of course she had to cancel all of her appointments. And like an idiot, I should have just camped out until the funeral was over. I don't know how many days that would have taken. And gotten the appointment. But since it was a spur of the moment thing, I said, I'll come back. Very stupid on my part. But then I thought about it. I said, wait a minute. Let's cookie cutter this mother and take the show on the road. And then I did this in 10 other countries, never with success, but always with really interesting consequences.